All right, great. I'm letting everyone in. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We are going to get started in about a minute as everyone joins us. So thank you very much for joining us today. Oh, and Anthony, thank you for turning on your camera. I know it's not convenient for everybody, but it really helps us as we're chatting with you today to see your face. So thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. And it is just the top of the hour, and I'm going to give everybody about another 15 seconds, 30 seconds or so, just to make sure we've got most of the people. I can let people in as we get started as well, but we don't want anyone to miss out on anything. And I'm so glad I waited because here comes Inez. Perfect. All right. Great. So I'm just going to check in. Chuck and Maureen, you can give me a thumbs up or an audible. Okay. You guys ready to get started? All right. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, guys. All right. So welcome everyone this afternoon to this workshop about refining your way after the pandemic. It's brought to you by the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County in collaboration with the Bradley Beach Library. And I want to give a special thank you to Cynthia Becker with the library, who had the idea for this workshop and has welcomed us into your community today. So Cynthia has some construction in the background, so she's not going to be saying anything, but I know she says welcome to everyone, and she's so glad for your participation. We are recording this workshop, so it will be available afterwards to anyone who misses it. So, which is to say that if you have a friend who misses it, who's not with you, and you think the information is useful, you can point them to the recording after the fact, and Cynthia will be able to have the link for that. So again, thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to get started today with just a little bit of understanding about what we're going to be doing. So we're going to run today like a panel discussion. I'm going to be moderating it. My name is Marney Rohda, and I'm going to go let our two panelists introduce themselves. Chuck, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name's Chuck. I'm a contractor here in Michigan, though my son pretty much runs the company and I'm kind of a senior advisor. I also have a farm that I'm living on near Lansing, Michigan. Cynthia, we do a lot of library work, by the way. So we're renovating the city of Flint's libraries right now. So that's who I am. Maureen?
And I am Maureen Underwood. I am a former resident forever of Middletown, and I currently live in Dallas. And I work as a consultant on a lot of the projects with the Mental Health Association. Chuck and I have been friends forever. I think when it's over 50 years, it counts as forever. Mm-hmm. And even though we live across the country from each other, you know, we've had conversations during the pandemic, and some of the topics that we've talked about are some of the things that we're going to be bringing up today. So we thought, you know, if you didn't have someone to share your thoughts with during the pandemic, maybe there are some things that we're going to talk about that, you know, might resonate with you. I want to be really clear. We are not experts. I'm not sure who is an expert on this. But what we share with you is we've got that lived experience, and we hope we can validate some of you, what you went through, and some of what you continue to go through. So Marney, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk to us about what we know.
Thanks, Maureen. And yeah, as we get started, I do want to mention and invite everyone as we go through this panel part of our time together. If you have any questions or thoughts, to share them in the chat. If that doesn't work for you, you can just hold them till the end, because we are going to, at the end, open up the panel discussion, give you an opportunity if you want to unmute and ask some questions or share your own experiences. So there will be ample opportunity for that near the end of this time together today. In the interim, though, feel free, because I'll mostly be in the background here, feel free to put things in the chat. I can bring them into the conversation with Chuck and Maureen, or just share what you're saying. So that you're welcome to do that as well. So as we get started, we really wanted to summarize what you know already, the impact of the last year that this is the impact that so many have experienced. There's been a pause, and in most cases, an enforced pause in our lives and what we were doing. That came along with some increased solitude for many, with a coinciding decreased connection with friends and limited, and in some cases, no family contact. And what that did was also then it caused more dependence. It really highlighted your dependence, all of our dependence on other people. We had to rely on other people. Chuck, do you want to say a little bit about what you saw as different during the pandemic, what your experiences were?
Well, it was a lot quieter for sure. And, but the thing that struck me most is the lack of real contact with your loved ones, with my family. You know, you could talk to them on Zoom, but it's not the same thing as seeing your grandchild and giving them a hug. And I missed that an awful lot. And I also found that a lot about my family, how much we cared for one another. And over Mother's Day, I was going to have dinner with my daughter and her family, and her oldest daughter was cooking the meal, which was going to be quite an experience to begin with. And just before I left, the school had called, and their youngest son was ordered to quarantine for 2 weeks. And I told my daughter, I said, I just can't come, even though I'm vaccinated. If I happen to get sick, I would hate to have Clark carry that through his life. And she understood, and she was 100% for it. So there's many other things, but those are the two things that struck me most.
Well, you know, and as you talk about that, it sort of parallels my experience. I had moved across the country to be close to my grandchildren. And, you know, there were times when, you know, I lived with the dog who didn't communicate a whole lot back all the time. And I was just anxious for even socially distanced company. And, you know, kind of talked about going over to see my grandchildren. And my 14-year-old granddaughter said the same thing that you just said, Chuck. She said, you know, Nana, we're just really worried that you could get sick if you came here. So we don't want to see you. It's not that we don't want to, we feel like it's not safe. You know, there were my grandson's football games. It was the only team that won that this child has ever been on, and you couldn't have spectators. And I kind of characterized that, you know, on one side of the equation. The other side was my sister, who was homeschooling a 7 and a 9-year-old. And I think if you asked her, she would probably say she spent too much time with her grandchildren. So I think it's kind of that perspective of appreciating there are two sides to every story. And it helped me realize that with this in particular.
Thanks, Maureen. You know, I noticed with both what you and Chuck have both shared, a theme of loss. Do you feel, Maureen, that you've been able to gain some perspective on the losses you've experienced?
Well, you know, I would say my losses certainly were not nearly as significant as those experienced by people who were in residential homes or nursing homes, or who had people they knew and care about die. And yet I felt probably what you would call survivor guilt. You know, my life still had a fair amount of possibilities. I wasn't limited, you know, I could walk outside, I could walk down the street. And what I tried to remind myself was I wasn't losing this time. I was forced to use this time in a different way. You know, I certainly feel like in my 70s, every day's a gift. And some days I had to remind myself that time wasn't taken away from anybody. We just had to use it differently. And that, you know, I understand philosophically with every loss, there's a gain. And there were some days I actually could see that gain. Other days I couldn't, but if I could focus it that way, that was a little bit of the way I got some perspective. Chuck, how about you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was very lucky. I lost some acquaintances, and but no family members and no close friends. So the losses, I'm glad I didn't suffer anything quite like that. And one of the things I experienced was this sudden quietness in my life, which was new and I didn't understand particularly well because I've lived a very busy life, and all of a sudden everything slowed down to a real creep. And but I learned a lot about myself and had time to speak with my family, and I thought, gosh, I wish every year we could shut down for 2 weeks and just shut everything off like this, because it was revealing. And I also found I liked spending time by myself, maybe too much, but it was interesting.
Well, and the other thing that you and I had talked about that I think was a real loss for you was the whole idea of traveling.
Oh.
I've spent my life traveling. So, yes, I'm home, I'm stuck, but I know for you, it was a little different. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I've been busy most of my life with the construction business, which consumes quite a bit of the time that you do have, and travel was a luxury I just didn't have the time for. But now I go to Europe for maybe 5 or 6 weeks with a very not much of a plan, just go, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't know how many chances I'm going to have to do that. I know I've lost essentially 2 years of opportunity, and when you're 74, 2 years is a lot. And so that was a big disappointment to lose that. In that sense, there's some time I've lost. It's going to be very hard to get that experience back.
Well, yeah. And what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of what you hear, most people have focused on is the loss for kids. Mm-hmm. I lost the prom, I lost the football season, and I haven't heard a lot of conversation about those of us who are seniors, and what the losses have been for us. It's kind of like, well, you lived your life, you did all these things, and somehow they don't have the same importance, when at another level, I think maybe they even have more importance, because there's not this much left anymore. There's this much left. And so, the stuff that you're going to do in this, when it creeps down a little, it is a pretty big loss. So, I agree with you on that.
So I guess, Maureen and Chuck, with that said, what are your thoughts on as you move forward now and start to re-enter, re-engage with life? What are your thoughts on the pace of that? Chuck, maybe you want to say something first on that?
Well, I don't know how fast I don't know what the pace of it's going to be. If it's going to be plodding along, or if it's going to be a rocket ship and you take off and you're gone. That's why I wrote down some things that I've learned during this last year and several months that I don't want to forget, and I put it in my sock drawer, so when I go in the wrong direction, or I can accidentally run across it and say, you know what, I'm hanging out with people that aren't good for me. I'm not wasting my time with people that take my energy. Stuff like that. And I have a few other ones. Some I most likely won't share, and others I'd be happy to.
All right, keep it to yourself. Well, the thing that strikes me is that, especially, from what I just said about, you only have so much time left, there's some degree anxiety about making up for lost time. And I think that there's a sort of this tendency to make a lot of plans for getaways, for gatherings, the things that you missed, try to put them in as much as you can. And this goes back to kind of a theme that you were talking about. It's before you fill up your calendar, it really is important to slow down and carve out some of that open, unstructured time that we had in the last year. And because I think it's going to take some preparation to just sort of go back to that post-pandemic life, whatever that looks like. So it's being patient, and maybe it's expecting others to be patient with us, that they may have that expectation, come on, we're going, we're doing this, we're doing that. And for us to be able to say, you know what, I'm glad you're doing it, but I just want to get back into this slowly. My sister had been bugging me to come visit her in Florida since about January because Florida's rules seemed a little different. And I just was not comfortable going. I just wasn't comfortable, and I knew she was disappointed and I was disappointed, but it's like, I just couldn't put myself in that place that I was going to rush out and do something that wasn't comfortable for me. So, it's trying to take it slow.
So thanks, Maureen. I wonder though, talking about taking it slow, about brain overload and sometimes feeling like there's just too much going on, maybe feeling like you can't handle things. Can you share some insight on that?
Well, I think our brains are overloaded. And what I want to say, it's not just senior citizens. I think everybody's brain is overloaded, from little kids all the way on up. And it really got overloaded from, constantly managing all of the changes in pandemic safety routines. For kids, it was all the changes in school. We're, virtual, we're not. And just regular demands of our lives. And especially in the beginning, when you kind of felt like if you didn't go to the grocery store and get 10 rows of toilet paper, you would never have another piece of toilet paper again. So it took a lot of emotional energy, and it also took a lot of brain power to do that. And I don't think we appreciate the fact that what research tells us is that when we feel stressed, and I absolutely believe that COVID has been a chronic stressor for everybody. There may be other things that may be not so universal, but I think that that's pretty universal. Functions like our working memory and our attention tend to decline. It's the same way if you have your computer open to a lot of different internet tabs at the same time and it slows down. You can't process things quite so quickly. So what do you do about this? Well, I think one of the things is you have to be easy on yourself and remember that this is a real brain thing. This pandemic is a brain thing, not an age thing. If you think about it, when you were 30, you probably couldn't find your keys a lot of the time. When I was 40, I didn't know where my eyeglasses were, even if they were on top of my head. So that forgetting, I didn't blame it on age then. It was just, I had a lot on my mind. And I think that what's happened now, paradoxically, is the playing field is a little more even. I hear people in their 30s talking about, I can't find this, or people in their 40s, I can't find that. So all of us are experiencing a little of that cognitive stress. And it's so important not to blame it on age, to really blame it on the reality of life has been very stressful and it's affected all of us in the same way. So when you can't find your keys or your glasses, look on your nose.
Thanks, Maureen. And, I wonder, though, Maureen, with more than a year on the sidelines, can we return to normal the way life was, even though it's stopped and it's changed? What is the whole idea of new normal, or how does that fit in?
Oh, there's so much talk about this new normal stuff. And it kind of makes me crazy because the deal about normal, as all of us know, is normal is the way it's always been, which means life is always changing. It isn't about things staying the same. And it can be hard to remember, but we never step in the same river twice, even on the same day. So this expectation that we're going to go back to something that resembles what life was before, I think is really, really remembering that normal is change. Chuck, I think you have some perspective on this too.
Yeah, when you're 70 years old, you've lived a lot of different days, and every day is different. And every day that you wake up, there's a day that you have to live. How you live it, I suppose, is the discussion. But and that's the way I feel about coming back into what we currently call the new normal. We've had these things all the way through our life, and this last year or so, we've been in this place they call a pandemic. But even inside the pandemic phase, you got up every day, and you had a life to live, and you let it. And here you are today, and you're going to do the same thing tomorrow. So, it's not something that causes me a lot of angst. It just doesn't. I don't have any choice anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I guess right. I think that is very true. So I guess with that being said, though, what we don't want to do is we don't want to step over the fact that there have been some negative feelings. Maureen, do you want to talk a little bit about the fact that there are just some bad things have happened, and some days and some moments we might feel really unhappy?
Oh, if I read another story about positivity and how important it is all the time to focus on positivity and gratitude, yes, those are important, but please, you can't be there all the time. It reminds me of, this labeling a negative emotion. If you've ever listened to, if you ask somebody, how are you? You just kind of pass them by, how you doing? Almost everybody says fine. And, that's the good answer. Everybody's not fine. You just know it, but that's just sort of the standard answer. And I think that what becomes important for all of us is that when people who know us well and care about us ask us how we're doing, it's okay to say, I'm not so great today. What that does is it gives you an opportunity to get some validation about where you are, and it lets that other person share. I have a friend who, whenever anybody says, oh, and how are you? She says, I'm perfect. How are you? Well, what are you supposed to say to somebody who's perfect all the time? So I think that's a distancing maneuver. And I think to be able to be honest about where we are is really, really important, because there may be some things about the pandemic that even when it ends, it's not going to feel positive. Good mental health doesn't mean you feel good all the time. And I think that that's one of the fallacies, is that, if you have good mental health, you're always in a good mood. Not so much. It really means that you accept and you acknowledge the feelings you have when you have them. And that gives you an opportunity to do something about the ones that maybe don't feel quite so positive. You don't always have to see the silver lining. You do not always have to do that, because I think that sometimes, the fact that you can't see the silver lining makes you feel even worse about yourself when you're just being simply honest. The other thing about, kind of the pandemic is that there's going to continue to be stress, even as we technically move out of it. And the reality is that sometimes that stress creates anxiety for us, and that's not a bad thing either. It's just one of a range of feelings we can have, and being able to identify anxiety gives you the opportunity to do something about it. It tells you that there's something that needs your attention. I just had to fly across the country, and it was the first time in almost 2 years, and I used to fly 2, 3, 4 times a month. And I was so anxious about this flight. And I'm like, it really upset me, because I'm usually a pretty casual traveler. And I understood that returning to that hustle and bustle of the airports, and it was hustle and bustle, and returning to a crowded plane, every seat was full. There was no empty seat next to me, how I had to realize, okay, everybody on here probably is feeling the same way I'm feeling, or a whole lot of them are feeling that way. And we're all going to be careful about each other. You know, I think that that's one of my takeaways, is that there's more kindness. I've chosen to focus more on the kindness of people than the negativity, because there's both out there. And, you know, I had a conversation with the woman sitting in front of me who was going to be on the flight longer than I was. And I think that it helped me realize that even in the midst of that hustle and bustle, there is a moment of quiet that you can take for yourself. And then finally, I think the thing that's challenging is there's going to be a lot of expectations that other people have of us and have of what life is going to be. Oh, come on, you can come to this. Oh, the restaurant's open now. Oh, come do this, come do that. And hopefully we've learned to value our own opinions better. And we don't have to justify what our choices are. Thank you for the invitation, but I'd rather stay home. That's it. That's enough. I'm not comfortable in gatherings yet, or all these people, I don't know if they've been vaccinated. It's just, thank you, but I think I'll take a rain check. So I think that it's using those negative feelings to let it inform your decisions and make decisions that feel more comfortable to yourself. At least that's how I have tried to see it.
I really agree with that. I mean, to waste our time doing things that we don't need to do, or things that we don't enjoy, is a real waste of time, especially as long as most of us have lived. We've done a lot of that. And that's one of the items in my sock drawer, is to not waste time doing things that I don't need to do, that I don't enjoy, with people that are not good for me. And to make time for, it turns out I like solitude. I want to plan for that. I want to make sure that I say, you know, I'm gonna be gone for a week. I'm gonna go to my place in northern Michigan, and I'm gonna be alone, and not have to, you know, go to the guilt zone while I'm there. Just go and take advantage of that new thing that I found for myself that feels healthy.
Well, thanks so much, Chuck, because I really feel that Maureen mentioned a takeaway, and you're now talking about this this learning that you've had. And so I guess that's where I want to bring us next is, you know, you guys having gotten to the pandemic, having lived about 70 years each and going into it with that wisdom already, did you find during the pandemic that life experience gave you some wisdom that helped you, or you were able to share with anybody else?
Yeah, especially for younger people, that this was always going to pass. It was always going to end. We didn't know when, we didn't know how, but it was going to pass. And whatever comes in our new normal is going to pass as well. It may be worse, it may be better. That this is a lot of what living is. Experiences come and they go. They are not permanent. And you know, an 8-year-old grandchild will say, "But Grandpa, how long is it going to last?" And I have to say, Finn, no one knows. And he probably will never, he probably won't remember that, but I won't ever forget the discussion. So that's what my sense of it is. And
I wonder if he just might actually remember that, Chuck, by the way. I mean, who knows what the 8-year-old will remember, but I do think that is good examples of wisdom. Maureen, do you want to share anything here too?
Well, you know, I look at this signpost and I think about my life and I think, well, I've been in all these places. I may have started when I was a teenager, feeling unclear and unsure and bewildered. So none of these are new feelings. And even, you know, I can think of my grandkids and the kids we work with in school settings and the other work we do, you know, that there's these kids in elementary school who are confused and perplexed right now. So there's just this list of feelings, I think, as you just said, Chuck, that just kind of come and go through our lives. I would probably add what you just said, that whole idea of solitude, because I don't, and there is a little space there's a couple little empty spaces, and I would put solitude as one of those feelings, because I think we have it more than we know, and I don't think it's really acknowledged or supported. It's kind of like, well, you're isolating or you're withdrawing, and I think to redefine that as a positive thing, that sometimes we need solitude, and sometimes we need a pause. Sometimes we need a timeout, that life can be too much, and that even in the course of a normal day, a short timeout can really, really be helpful. And, I'm thinking about how this evolved for me through the pandemic, and, kind of listening to, what you're saying about everything gonna pass, Chuck, is in the beginning, I was sort of struck by, as I'm sure many of us were, by all the shortages we had, in quotes, the toilet paper and the flour, because everybody was making bread, including you, Chuck, and yeast, and there were everything, there were shortages. And I reflected back on my family. And, I kind of remembered, my parents had lived through the Depression, and the mentality of that Depression had always stuck with my mother in particular. How, you had to reuse plastic bags, and you saved your garbage bags, and, you saved everything, because you never knew when you were going to run out. So it was always better to make sure that you saved what you had and made do. And it gave me this generational awareness I had just never had before, and a different connection to my mother. I really could see her in a different way, which in some ways to me was really a gift. So that's sort of what I took away. And I know, Chuck, you had a similar experience with a friend of yours.
I have a very good friend. Her name is Maria, and she's a Cuban refugee. She came here in the 1960s when she was 6 years old, and her family fled the Castro regime, and they lost everything. I mean, they had nothing. And so she learned how to make use of everything that she had. And I was complaining about the things that you were complaining about, going to the grocery store, nothing's there, blah, blah, blah. And she grabbed my hand, took me over to the pantry, and she opened it up, and she said, look in that pantry. There's enough food in there to feed 4 people for a month. So forget about worrying about food. You don't have any food anxiety. Just forget about it and go live your life. And so when she comes over, every once in a while, I've got a plastic Ziploc bag that I'm going to throw away, and I rinse it out, and I reverse it, pat it dry, put it back in the drawer. She knows what I'm doing, but I heard her, and that's the whole point.
Yeah, those are some really great examples of not only things that you guys, your experience, but how you were able to get some new perspective from other people, which I think is so key, which really then, I really want to lead us into, with all the ideas you've shared and the conversation we've had so far, I wonder and there's been some hints to this, but what ideas or thoughts from the past year you want to really bring forward into your pre-pandemic, your post-pandemic life, from your pandemic life. And I also just want to open this up to everybody else too. I'll have Maureen and Chuck share, and anybody else who's with us today is welcome to unmute and share as well. But I'll start with with Chuck. Actually, I'll start with you, Chuck. What's a takeaway or several that you want to share?
Well, I've mentioned them before, but generally, I think it's critical that we create a list of things that we found very positive and perhaps negative, but mostly positive, that affected our lives. And mine are first and foremost, don't do anything that you don't need to do, that you don't enjoy doing, or doesn't add value to your life. Don't hang around with people that don't bring something to the relationship. If they're just takers, you don't need them. They'll find plenty of people that will take them. And and don't be guilty. One of the things I learned is I don't need to work any longer. And I worked for 60 years in my life, and not going to work in my family meant that you were lazy. And I found out, well, I don't need to work. My son's taking care of those things. And since it was a pandemic, I couldn't go to work anyway. So I had this few months that taught me it's okay. You don't have to define yourself by your job any longer. You've done your work. Now enjoy your time, whatever you have left of it. That's the long and short of it.
Thanks, Chuck. What about you, Maureen?
Well, I think what this made so clear to me, and it's clear as I sit here today, that time flies. I've always been, my life motto has always been kind of carpe diem. I always wanted to make the most of every minute. I think being a social worker and working with people who waited to live their dreams really impacted me at a young age. And I just always felt like, don't hold on to things, try to do everything you want to do when you can do it. And so the idea that there's been this whole year where I didn't do certain things, it's been trying to figure out what the things were that I did do. I think, as you're saying, Chuck, that gave my life some meaning that I wouldn't have paid attention to necessarily if I had had the usual hustle and bustle. The other thing that was pretty significant for me is I'm a very independent person. I just always have been. And this year, over the last year or so, I lost some of that because I couldn't be as independent. Younger neighbors would come to the door and say, we're going to the grocery store, can we get something for you? Or my kids would come over and leave groceries. I'm used to kind of repaying people favor for a favor, and I couldn't do that. So I really had to struggle with the idea of having gratitude for just accepting what people were doing for me just because they were kind. I always kind of have assumed people are kind, but to be on the receiving end so much was really very powerful for me. And I think helped me realize, especially, and I think it's a good lesson as I get older, maybe I'm not going to be able to be so independent. And being dependent is not the worst thing in the world. And you don't always have to repay every kindness with a kindness. That, you pay it forward in enough other kinds of ways that it all evens out in the end. And sometimes just saying thank you to someone is really all they need. So that was a big lesson for me.
Thanks, guys. So I do want to, as we're nearing the end of our prepared material, I've got 2 more slides, I think, ahead of this, but I do want to open it up. Someone want to unmute and share a takeaway of their own?
I'd like to jump in if it's okay.
Anthony, I'd love to hear from you.
I have a little bit more than a little bit, but let me just say, number one, the pandemic created the ground zero. So we were all basically, it just wiped out so many of what we understood in the landscape, the emotional landscape, the topography of our understanding of what culture was. And I wrote over here, there are no paradigms for us to follow. And so I think what was lacking was there was lack of leadership in terms of understanding to do a forensic of what was going on. So I wrote down over here that the disruption produced it impacted business. It impacted, as Chuck was saying, and Maureen was saying, personal relationships. So the rituals of relationships, it made a mess of education. Spiritually, people could not gather together. And so that was another major thing. The other thing is it decimated the health industry. I know people who worked in the health industry, who worked in hospitals like Columbia, and they had so much dysfunction going on that they had some people telling them they should wear masks and they shouldn't wear masks. And so who cares? Wear the mask and it doesn't matter. It's easy because you're in a hospital. Okay, so it doesn't matter. Even if it doesn't stop COVID, it might stop something else. Do you know what I'm saying? So let's just do things right. The other thing was we didn't have in place grief protocols. Really, we as a society, we shun death and dying. And, you know, if something is dying, we just don't have the equipment. It hasn't been modeled for us. We're so busy being busy. So let me just throw a couple more things. The other thing is right now, very concerned. I mentioned this at the, Cynthia's still there, Cynthia Becker. I mentioned that we should have done this at the Board of Trustee meeting. And I was in somewhat kind of disappointed that we're doing it for the seniors because there's so much suicide going on for the young people that everybody really needs to benefit from what's going on. And, you know, I have a couple more things, but I'm only going to say one more thing. I was there at the New York Stock Exchange September 11th, 2001. And I heard the planes hit the buildings. I knew exactly what they were. And I knew we were under attack. But one of the most important things I understood is we were living in history. And so what you want to do when you're living in history is realize that it hasn't been written. It's being written right then. So pay attention, take notes, figure out what you're going to do moving forward. And what I wrote over here is start sowing seeds into your next season.
Wow. So I'm sure Maureen has a couple things to say, but I just first want to thank you, Anthony, for bringing so much into this conversation. I feel like now that I noticed you were writing notes all along, I feel like you must have been biting your tongue for quite some time, but I'm really glad that you brought all this into the conversation. And I'm going to just bookmark your sowing seeds, FYI, then we're going to talk about what those sowing seeds might be in just a minute on the next slide. So if you want to talk about those in a minute, you can. Maureen, I feel like you might have a couple of things you want to say back to Anthony here.
I'm just, you know, I'm just so struck by your wisdom, Anthony, and especially your wisdom from September 11th. You know, it's wisdom we all gained at a very high price on that day. And, you know, Marney and I actually worked with families for about 8 years, you know, because in Morris County. And it always takes me back to trying to get that perspective of something terrible can happen and what's going to come of it. And I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your ability to take the larger issues, which we didn't talk about today, and sort of pull them all in and tie them into that sort of framework of where we are as people. So thank you so much, you know, for that perspective.
One more thing. I apologize. But what?
Don't apologize. No. That's what you're here for.
Okay, but listen, there's something dynamic about communication without face. I do so many Zoom calls and so many people don't jump on with their face. And part of facial communication, everybody talks about body language, but 90% of communication is done with your face. And when you're not on camera, you know, I did a quick seminar on how to be likable online because people you know, it's not hard. Just smile. Like Marney intentionally took the time when she wasn't speaking to smile. So we really need to be proactively smiling. We need to be thinking about something positive. We need to be looking at the camera and all this other stuff. But what's so important and what's so decimating is the fact that we have lost the ability to communicate using our face. It's like hopping on one leg, you know, and talking through a mask and then talking through a plexiglass. You're saying, you know, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. This is ridiculous. So sorry.
That's great.
That's a great point too. And I want to bring Ruth into the conversation. Ruth, did you have something you wanted to share as far as takeaways or something else here today?
Can you hear me?
You sound perfect.
Okay. No, I want to thank you for, you know, for this meeting because it really is helpful. And, you know, I have a lot of takeaways from this, but my perspective is a little bit different because I was working from home since the beginning of the pandemic, but I lost my job.
Mm.
So, and I mean, it's not all bad. I was able to retire, which wasn't my choice necessarily, not, my first choice. I wanted to work a little bit longer, but just working from home, it made that transition a lot easier for me. I felt,
Yeah.
I've had mental health issues, and, I felt like it leveled the playing field dramatically, that other people were feeling kind of the type of thing that I have felt most of my life.
That's a good point.
So, and the other, I noticed with the mental health issue that now it is on the table, whereas before, when it was on the table, it was always a negative. And, one thing that occurred to me was that, if your physical health, you're not always totally healthy, you have things that go wrong. And the same is true with your mental health. It doesn't mean that it's the end of the world, or you're never going to be mentally healthy again. It's something that takes work the same way that our physical health does. And I think that now, that is more obvious to people, because we're
That's
all
a great
going through it.
analogy. Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's a great analogy, and I have never heard it phrased exactly that way, but that's one of those things I'm definitely going to be taking with me out of our conversation today. Maureen, before I change slides to our wrapping it up, did you want to say anything?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, so great. So here's where, as we start to wrap things up, because I am wary of the time, we are just a minute over, but I really appreciate what everyone has shared. I think it was very, very worthwhile. I just want to start with Maureen and Chuck, and then Anthony and Ruth, and anyone else who's on wants to share too. So we've talked about the past, we've talked about some takeaways. What's something, Maureen, that you're just really looking forward to?
Well, I will tell you, every year my family, who live all over the country, and there's not a lot of us, we're about under 20, but we live all over the country, we have a family reunion. And last July, I just didn't feel comfortable going. And I was so uncomfortable with it. And it was so hard for me. I asked them not to send me any pictures. I didn't want any communication. I didn't want to know that was happening, and I was missing it. So this year I am going, and I am extraordinarily excited about that. So thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Maureen. And Chuck, what about you? What are you looking forward to?
Well, my family situation is different than Maureen's. I'm from a massive family. People born with little tiny ears and big mouths. And, but I miss them all, and I miss the tactical part of the relationships. You can Zoom all you want, and of course, I agree that the face is so much a part of the communication, but so is holding someone in your arms.
That's great.
And,
thanks.
yeah.
All right, and what about you, Ruth? Did you want to share something you're looking forward to doing in the future?
Actually, I'm looking forward to seeing my son and my grandson. They live in Canada, and we still can't cross the border, and they can't cross. So I've already missed 2 of my grandson's birthdays. So I'm really looking forward to that. That may be a while longer. But yeah, and I'm looking forward to a new chapter, because as I said, I did retire, and I'm not really sure what that means for me yet.
Well, that sounds
Good luck.
hopeful.
Thank
Good
you.
luck creating something great.
Thank you.
Anthony, what about you, Anthony? What are you looking forward to?
2 things. I'm sowing the seed into you, Marney.
Yes.
And I'm going to sow the seed that we should expand this to a series, and that it should be try to do this properly publicize it, and give some templates, and actually bring some young people in. And one of the things that occurred with me is a little bit with Ruth. I've been working from home since 2001, so the pandemic didn't affect that too much. But one of the great things is the outdoors. And I go every morning into Avon, and not to get too specific, I spend time with the Lord. And I really have grown. I've developed a community down there, and I've been able to share some of the stuff that we've all been going through. And now all those 20 or 30 people that I see at 5 o'clock in the morning, we share something special. And so everybody looks for each other and people know each other's names. So maybe the most important seed that we could sow is knowing the other people's names and using them. Even if you have to write it down, in a notepad, just remember them and ask them how they are.
That's beautiful. I love that. Anthony, thank you so much. I like sowing seeds of all kinds. Anthony, you'll see my email address right here on this slide, but you also could reach out to Cynthia and she will connect. If you don't want to write it down right now, she'll also.
Because we're going to take you up on your offer.
Oh yeah,
Anthony.
you don't,
You
don't ask us.
know us,
Don't
but-
ask us twice to do more things. We love to do things. So absolutely. So that's how to reach me, but Cynthia will connect us as well. We could get together and do something. Does anyone else, I know Cynthia has noise going on. I don't want to let anyone else out. Does anyone else want to share anything right now? I will just say too, that if anyone didn't want to do a lot of chatting today, but has questions, you either can reach our panel through me or through Cynthia and she'll connect us. So if there's something that you have a question about or want to share, we don't want to close the door when I disconnect the Zoom call. We want to keep the door open always. So either through my email or through Cynthia, we're always available for you. Maureen and Chuck, do you want to have any parting words right now?
Oh, this is where the message of you get more than you give. And I just think being a part of this and listening to all your comments, Chuck, your willingness to do this, it's just so heartwarming for me because it makes me realize we're all in that same lifeboat and we're going to make it through. We're going to make it through. So thank you all for coming today. That just meant a lot.
Thanks, Maureen. And Chuck, what about you?
This is my first exposure to doing something like this. Yes, I've been in lots of Zoom meetings, but not in a capacity like this. And it was worthwhile. I learned a lot, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I do want to give Chuck a big shout out because Maureen and I have worked together since September 11th, and we've done 130 or more of these kind of things since the pandemic started. And we roped Chuck in, and I'm not sure he knew what he agreed to when he originally agreed to this. Well, but he didn't quit. He actually showed up and did it. So big props to Chuck for doing that. Thank you guys all for joining us today. I want to wish you a very happy day and take care of yourselves. I hope we are all in touch again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Cynthia, thank you very much for this.
See ya.
See ya.